At a family dinner, my dad called my 5-year-old daughter imported goods and demanded I give her up if I wanted to inherit his property. I refused. In response, he threw a plate of food at both of us. What my grandma did next and the truth she revealed changed everything. Hey, Reddit. Family dinners at my parents' house always came with unspoken rules: don't contradict my father, don't ask uncomfortable questions, and most importantly, don't draw attention to anything he deemed shameful. For years, I learned to follow these rules. I kept my voice calm, my opinions quiet, and my head down. I nodded at things that made my stomach churn and smiled at comments that cut deeper than anyone else realized. But the night my father called my daughter imported goods, something inside me broke in a way I knew would never heal. We arrived exactly on time, because arriving early meant being criticized for hovering, and being late meant disrespect. I held my daughter's hand tightly as we walked up the familiar stone path to the house I grew up in. She skipped slightly, excited. "Grandpa's house smells like food," she whispered happily. I swallowed hard. The dining room looked the same as always: a polished table, heavy chairs, and family photos lining the walls, most featuring my siblings and their children. My daughter appeared in just one photo, tucked into the corner of a group shot, barely visible. My father sat at the head of the table, as usual. My mother hovered nearby, already anxious, preparing to smooth things over if needed. My siblings chatted easily, laughing loudly, comfortable in ways I had never been allowed to be. I helped my daughter into her chair. She sat straight, hands folded, trying her best to be good. She always tried. Dinner started politely enough: small talk about the weather, work updates, compliments about the food. Then my father's gaze landed on my daughter. He stared at her for an uncomfortably long moment. "So," he said slowly, tapping his fork against his plate, "you still plan on keeping her?" The table went quiet. My daughter looked at me, confused. I felt my chest tighten. "What?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "I mean," he gestured vaguely towards my child, "you know what people say about imported goods." The word hit me like a slap. My daughter didn't understand, but I did. So did everyone else at the table, because no one reacted with confusion. No one asked what he meant. They just watched. "That's not funny," I said, my voice low. My father smirked. "I'm not joking," he replied. "You took on a responsibility that doesn't belong to this family." Heat rushed to my face. "She's my family," I said firmly. He scoffed. "You want to inherit my property someday? Then you need to make better choices." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. He shrugged. "Give her up," he said casually. "Put her where she belongs. Otherwise, don't expect anything from me." The room froze. My daughter tightened her small hand around mine. "Mom," she whispered. I couldn't breathe. "I'm not discussing my child like she's a transaction," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to steady it. My father's expression hardened instantly. "You always were difficult," he snapped. "You think you're better than this family." "No," I replied. "I think my daughter deserves respect." That was the wrong thing to say. He stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. "You don't get to lecture me in my house," he shouted. Before I could react, he grabbed his plate and threw it. The food hit the table first, then splattered across my arm, my dress, and my daughter's lap. She screamed, not loudly, but in that sharp, terrified gasp only a child makes when they don't understand why an adult suddenly seems dangerous. The room erupted. My mother shouted his name. My siblings stood up. Someone knocked over a chair. But my father didn't look remorseful. He looked satisfied. "That's what happens when you don't listen," he barked. I was shaking. I pulled my daughter into my arms, brushing food from her hair, my hands trembling so badly I could barely do it. She was crying now, real crying. Silent tears streamed down her face, her body stiff with fear. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "This ends now." I stood up. Every eye followed me. "You don't get to speak to her like that, you don't get to threaten her existence, and you don't get to hurt her." My father laughed bitterly. "You're choosing her over everything," he said. I didn't hesitate. "Yes." That's when I noticed the doorway. My grandmother stood there. She hadn't spoken all evening. She had seen everything, and her face, usually calm and reserved, was pale with fury. She took a step forward, then another. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, deadly quiet. What my father didn't realize as my grandmother stepped fully into the room was that he had just forced the truth out of hiding. And once it was spoken, nothing in our family would remain unchanged. No one spoke as my grandmother walked toward the table. Not my father, not my mother, not my siblings. The air felt heavier with each step she took. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. Her steps were slow and deliberate, like she wanted everyone to grasp the seriousness of the moment. I had seen her angry before, but never like this. She stopped beside my daughter, who was still clinging to me, her face buried in my shoulder, trembling. My grandmother reached out and gently brushed a piece of rice from her hair. Her hand was steady, soft, and careful. Then she straightened and looked directly at my father. "Sit down," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. My father scoffed instinctively as he always did when someone challenged him. But something in her eyes made him hesitate. "You know," my grandmother continued calmly, "that if you ever crossed this line, I would speak." My mother looked panicked. My siblings exchanged glances. "What line?" my father snapped. My grandmother turned to the rest of the table. "The one you hoped I'd die before anyone found out about." My stomach dropped. "You've been threatening inheritance again," she said almost sadly, "using property like a leash." My father laughed nervously. "Mom, don't start." "No," she interrupted sharply. "You don't get to silence me anymore." The room was completely still now. She turned to me. "Take your daughter to the sink," she said gently. "Clean her up." I hesitated. "Grandma, please," she said softer now. "She doesn't need to hear what comes next." I nodded. As I stood, my father slammed his hand on the table. "No," he barked. "She stays." My grandmother didn't even look at him. "She leaves," she said. And for the first time in my life, my father said nothing. I took my daughter to the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I wiped food from her clothes, whispering reassurances. I wasn't sure she believed me. "Am I bad?" she asked quietly. That question shattered something inside me. "No," I said firmly, holding her face in my hands. "You are loved. You are wanted. You are perfect." She nodded, but her eyes were still fearful. I hugged her tight. From the dining room, I could hear my grandmother's voice, steady and unbroken. "When you were born," my grandmother was saying, "you were already angry." My father scoffed. "This again. You hated that your sister inherited the house before you," she continued. "You hated that I trusted her more. And when she died, you convinced everyone that property should pass to you." My heart started pounding. "That house," she said clearly, "was never yours." The room erupted. "What?" my uncle shouted. "That's not true," my mother said weakly. My grandmother raised her hand. "The property isn't a trust," she said, "one I created 40 years ago." My father stood abruptly. "You're lying." She met his gaze without fear. "I'm not." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, yellowed folder. "I kept quiet because I hoped you'd change," she said. "But after what you just did to that child," her voice wavered for the first time, "no." She slid the folder onto the table. "The house passes to my grandchildren, not my children." My father's face drained of color. "You don't have the authority." "I do," she said. "And I already executed it." Silence. "And before you ask," she added, "no, your threats mean nothing. You cannot take what was never yours." My siblings stared at my father like they were seeing him for the first time. My mother sank into her chair. I returned to the doorway just in time to hear my grandmother's final words: "You will never threaten this child again. You will never speak about her like she is disposable." She turned to me. "And if you choose to leave tonight, you will not leave empty-handed." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I walked forward and took my daughter's hand. "We're leaving," I said calmly. My father opened his mouth, but my grandmother cut him off. "Let them go," she said. We walked out, not rushed, not chased. For the first time, no one tried to stop me. 3 weeks later, I received a letter, official, legal. The trust documents were real. My grandmother had done everything she said she would. My father's inheritance, the one he had used like a weapon, had never existed. My grandmother moved in with us 2 months later. She said she didn't want to die surrounded by people who confused power with love. My daughter adored her. So did I. Some people confuse control with family. They think love can be negotiated, threatened, or taken away. But real family doesn't ask you to choose between dignity and belonging. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them and protect your children accordingly. That's all for today's story. Stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for watching.